And all right, good luck. Thanks. Let me see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 22. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. What a great turnout we have here for Sister Monica. I'm just going to give you a brief introduction. Sister Monica and I studied together in New York City at One Spirit Learning Alliance. We were in the ISC Interspiritual Spiritual Direction program together. And it's just been so exciting. When Sister Monica started her TikTok, I was just so tickled to sit and listen, because I've got to be honest, I was afraid to really ask her too many personal questions. I was so thankful that she was answering them all on TikTok for me, like the best type of soap to use for your skin. So anyway, when Sister Monica shared on social media that she was publishing a book, I reached out to her right away to see if she'd be interested to come here to Seymour Congregational Church. And she got right back to me to say yes, she would. So we do have books available in the back. We'll be selling them for $20 tonight, and all of the proceeds will go to the Seymour Oxford Food Bank, which is right next door. So if you're interested in purchasing a book afterwards, you are welcome to do that. And I'm just going to turn it over to you. We have, try this now.
Okay. Check. Oh, that's way better.
Okay. We're live streaming for people around the country, so that's why
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know who heard what on the live stream yet, but this book is about my journey from being a little kid in Georgia as a Southern Baptist, and then going through all kinds of switchbacks and turns and setbacks to become an Episcopal nun when I was 46 years old. My family basically told me that I would become a Roman Catholic over their dead bodies, because they had been taught as good Southern Baptists that the Catholic Church, my grandmother used to say to me, you know in Revelation where they talk about the whore of Babylon? that's the Catholic Church. I was thinking, I don't think that's right, but she definitely was convinced. She wouldn't even talk about the Roman Catholic Church. So the only people that went to that church in my little hometown in Georgia were people from elsewhere, no Southerners went to this church, are the people who were from different countries who worked at the mental institution in my hometown. So that's the only Roman Catholics we had. And then when I was growing up, and I went to high school with a guy named Warren. We've been friends since we were 12 years old. Warren is black and gay, and he was out and proud even when he was a kid. He was just like, I like boys, what's the problem? So he was the first person I ever met who was not afraid to be himself. He wasn't afraid of the backlash of being gay in Georgia at that time in history, like the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And his nieces went to the local parochial school. There was St. Mary's Elementary School in my hometown. And Warren and I were always going over there to visit his nieces. They were twins, and their names were Shalise and Elise. They were adorable. They had like a huge bow in their hair all the time, and their little school uniforms. So when we went over there to see Shalise and Elise, I met nuns for the very first time in my entire life. They were from the Daughters of Charity from Emmitsburg, Maryland. Wow. And that was not planned. And they were nothing like I had been told that nuns would be. My mother was always saying, oh, nuns are horrible people. They're angry and they beat children with rulers. and they're suppressed. I had kind of a hippie yoga mother. So she was saying, you've got to come into full fruition as a woman. You have to have children. That's what your body is built for. And I was thinking, I can't think of anything worse. I want to be a nun. So when I met these nuns, the Daughters of Charity, they were like the guitar nuns from the late 70s and 80s after Vatican II. They had the short, like mid-calf habits, blue, very cute. And they had those little clip-on veils that were short. And I thought, I want to dress like that. I want to play the guitar. I want to teach in school. And I was 17 years old at the time. I was like, I want to be a nun. I want to be a Daughter of Charity. And of course, I went back to my mother, and she said, absolutely not. She said, if you're thinking about being a nun, it's because you're scared to get married and have children. And that's what you need to do to be happy. Because that's what she did to try to be happy. So her speeches and everything worked on my two other sisters. They always had boyfriends, and they ended up being married twice. And my older sister had children. So they fulfilled all those requirements. And in order to forget about being a nun, because I had been told by friends and family that it was the worst thing I could possibly do as a female, I thought, well, I'll just be a fan of nuns. I'll just read about them. I read the Nun Story, the book, and that made it even worse. So I was like, oh, I really want to do this. And I was always watching movies. When I was a little kid, The Flying Nun was on television. That was a really good show. It was really funny. And it really showed the joy of religious life. That really got to me. I thought, I know this isn't real, it's Hollywood, but it's still a depiction that's very different than other depictions. So I read everything I could get my hands on about nuns, and then I had done some plays in high school, so people said, you should probably go into theater. So I did a couple of plays in college, and then my friend said that he was auditioning for New York University's theater department. And I was so naive. I was like such a country bumpkin. I was like, that sounds pretty cool. Can I go with you? So I made an appointment the same day he was doing his audition in Atlanta, which was this huge metropolis to us. And we went to Atlanta, and he auditioned, and I auditioned with a monologue from Joan of Arc. How Catholic is that? And then I was completely shocked when I got the letter that I was accepted. And because I had been going to a local college in my hometown where I had a full scholarship. And when I got accepted, they sent me this wonderful letter and this packet of how much money it cost. At that time, it was about $20,000 a year. This was in 1986. And I thought, there's just no way. So I applied for financial aid, and I got a scholarship for like 85%, 90% of my tuition and fees were covered. So then I had to ask my parents for the rest of it, my mom and my stepfather. And they were not happy about that. They said, okay, we'll take out a loan, but you better do well and you better make good grades. So I went to NYU and majored in theater. I got an acting degree, which is completely useless. Don't tell anybody to do that because unless you want to be an acting teacher. But I learned a lot of stuff and made good friends, some of whom are still my friends to this day. And I somehow graduated from college in spite of my poverty. I was homeless for 3 months in New York because my dorm room, there was a mix-up when I got to school that year, and they didn't have my dorm room for me. So this is also in the book. And then after that, I thought, well, I'm going to try to make it as an actor. I was working as a nanny at the time for the man who used to be the head of Revlon's advertising department. And he came up with the campaign of the most beautiful women in the world wear Revlon. So he was a big wig in the advertising world. His job, he was doing really well, making a lot of money in New York. And then he got a job offer from Paramount Pictures to be the head of advertising, worldwide advertising at Paramount. So he accepted the job, and he and his wife asked me if I would move with them to Los Angeles for his job. And I was like, sure, That's the way I always made plans. Somebody would be like, you want to do it? Sure. Didn't think about it at all. And so I went with them and thought, the weather here is terrific. But I worked as a nanny for a couple of years. And then the dad of the family, who was very paternal towards me, got me a job at an ad agency because he said, you've been a nanny long enough, you need a grown-up job. So instead of being a live-in nanny, I called it an outpatient nanny, where I had a job during the day, and then I babysat at night and on the weekends. I did that for years, trying to make it as an actor, and I had given myself 10 years in Los Angeles to make it as an actor while I was kind of paying the bills doing advertising. I'd become a photo editor, I was a manager of a department, and never liked my job in advertising because that wasn't where I was supposed to be. So after 10 years of trying to be an actor, all my friends were getting on Saturday Night Live, and in the book I talk about all these famous people that I came into contact with during that time. Their careers were just taking off, and after 10 years I didn't have an agent and I had never had a paying job. So I had to give up on acting. I felt like it was a disappointment to my family and all that. But I was still in advertising and I was doing very well. I kept getting job after job. I worked at Paramount Pictures for 4 years. I worked at IMAX, the large format motion picture company, for 4 years. 4 years was usually my limit because I'd be like, if I'm ever going to make more money, I have to change jobs and lie about the amount that I made in the previous job. So that's how I got raises. And at some point, I met a man that I was working with. He became my friend. He was dating someone, and they had this horrible relationship. So he and I became friends. And after his breakup with her, I was really there for him and was a shoulder to cry on. And we started dating, which was very exciting for my mother because I had never really dated, and I had never had a real boyfriend. And at the age of 26, I finally had a boyfriend. And we dated for 5 years. We had a terrible relationship, which you can read about in the book. And it couldn't have been worse. He was just very cold and unfeeling, unloving. And I thought I had it made. I thought he was the greatest guy in the world. But during our relationship, I still kept feeling that tug to be a nun. It just wouldn't go away. It was very persistent. And I thought, well, it's because my relationship was so terrible and I didn't make it as an actor. So I need to determine if this is just me wanting to do this or if this is God, if this is really a calling from God. So I started a real discernment process and started emailing nuns because around that time, email was just starting to be used pretty widely. And for an introvert like me, I was never going to pick up the phone and call a convent. I would rather drop dead. So I started emailing convents and getting information from nuns because it's such a hidden world. You really don't know what their life is actually like. It's very different from the way it's depicted in movies and on television. And it's the hidden life. They're all trained to live a life that is hidden and away from the world. So we don't know that much about it. And I kept emailing these nuns, asking them all these questions like, do I have to sleep in a dorm with other people snoring? Can I take a shower more than once a week? Like the nuts and bolts of it. And they were all really amused by this, because this was all stuff I had seen in movies and read in books. And they were like, no, it's not like that. So then after we had been dating for about 5 years, my husband's family and my family really started asking us, so where's this relationship going? And I said, nowhere, actually. We just kind of see each other once a week, and that's our relationship. And my friends were asking too. They were like, if you feel like it's never going to go beyond this, then you probably need to break up because it's going nowhere. And I was thinking, yeah, I was kind of getting some questions in my mind about it too, because we were exactly as close together as we were the day that we started dating. And you're supposed to go closer, from what I understand, in marriages and in dating relationships. So he and I both succumbed to the pressure around us, and I said, we're going to have to break up because this is not going anywhere. And he said, well, my dad's been asking about that too, so maybe we should just get married. And I was like, okay. And it wasn't nothing romantic at all. Yeah. And then I started asking my friends, well, how did you and your partner decide to get married? And they were all like, he went down on his knee, and we were in the mountains, or we were at dinner on Valentine's Day. And I was like, wow, that's really not what happened with me. And and then he went away on a trip, and he went to Russia because he was a filmmaker, and he wrote me letters from Russia, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is so romantic. And he said he had bought me a ring, and I thought, he bought me a ring in St. Petersburg, this is so glamorous. And then when he came back, I was telling everybody, we're going to be officially engaged, he bought me a ring. It was a little like turquoise and pewter ring, like that cost like $10. And I was, oh no. So over the next few months, I was kind of nudging him about getting married and getting an actual engagement ring. I was like, okay. And we went downtown and together. It was very uneventful. It was just like, that looks good, okay. And got the ring, and that was it. And then we got married. We went to Edinburgh, Scotland, and got married because supposedly at that time it was like the Las Vegas of Europe. You could get married with just your birth certificate. Didn't matter where you were from or anything. And you had to give them your information like 30 days before your wedding. So that was fun. The wedding and the honeymoon were fantastic. We went around Scotland for 2 weeks. We went to Paris for 2 weeks. It was a really lovely wedding and honeymoon and a horrendous marriage. So at least God gave me this terrific honeymoon. And while I was married for 2 years. And I realized that because my husband was an atheist, he was a vehement atheist. He would watch television. If somebody was talking about God or whatever on CNN, he would go, what an idiot. How can you believe there's some wizard in the sky that's making stuff happen? And he was very intellectual, and he said, it's only for stupid people to believe in God. And I thought to myself, I never realized how much my faith, how important it was to me until I married somebody like that. I had been sneaking off to church and trying to be cool and fit in with my atheist friends by hiding the fact that I was religious. And I started being rebellious towards him by talking more and more about my spirituality and God. And I was really emailing a lot of nuns at that time. And then, long story short, it's in the book, I found out he had been cheating on me the whole time, like prodigiously cheating on me. And he told me that he had gotten married because he figured it would help his career. He would look more stable. And so I was just sort of this cover for what he was doing in his private life. And I was devastated and horrified, of course, but there was also a part of me that said, God, is this why you're doing this? Because I'm on the wrong path. I got very depressed. I had a crisis I was in a job I hated. I was in a marriage where it was very cold and sort of loveless, and my husband was unfaithful to me. And I was really talking to a lot of nuns. And one of them that I was emailing back and forth with, I said, I've had this hesitation to become Roman Catholic because I live in LA. I'm very, left-leaning. I'm a bleeding heart liberal. And is there any chance that the Catholic Church is going to change its mind about things like reproductive freedom, female clergy, and LGBTQ plus people? And the nuns emailed me back, and she said, probably not for another 500 years. Well, those things change. Yeah, exactly. But she said, you sound like an Episcopalian. And I said, well, what's an Episcopalian? I'd been driving past Episcopal churches. She said, they're pretty liberal. I think you'd fit in there. I said, oh, that would be great, but it's too bad they don't have monks and nuns. She said, oh, yes, they do. So that day, I got in touch with the rector of All Saints Church in Beverly Hills, and she became the person who guided me down my path to become a nun. It took me 10 years to get out of debt, because you can't be in debt when you enter a community. But entering the community in 2012 changed my life for the better. I've never regretted it, like one time have I ever regretted it. There were times in the beginning when I questioned whether I was in the right community, but I always knew that being a sister was my identity. It was my tribe. And as a spiritual director, I always tell people, you have to find your tribe. You have to find people who get you and belong to a group of people who support and encourage you, where you feel safe. And that's exactly what I found. The book also talks about in my childhood, my father was a drug addict, alcoholic. There was a lot of violence in my home. We moved a lot. We were extremely poor. I went without food quite a bit when I was a kid. And I didn't get on the free lunch program at school until I was in high school. So there were plenty of days when I didn't have breakfast, I didn't have lunch. I'd come home and have a bowl of cereal. That's how I grew up. So being part of a family now, being part of a family that loves me and takes care of me, was pretty much what I was looking for my entire life. And it's healed a lot of scars that I had from my childhood to learn how to love and to learn how to get through life as a team. I highly recommend it, but it's not for everybody. And now I would like to open it up to questions. You can ask me anything you want. It doesn't have to be about the book. Even if you think it's weird, you can ask the question. That's okay. Yeah.
What does your mom think of your profession?
That's a really great question. She sort of came around. I told her when I had made the decision to leave my husband and to really do this, I wrote her a letter, because I'm so introverted. I can't even talk to my mother face to face about hard things. I wrote her a letter, and it was like a 4-page typed letter about all the clues and hints that I had that I was being called, and I mailed it from Los Angeles, so I was like sweating bullets waiting for her to reply, because she had always had such a huge, angry, negative reaction every time I brought it up. And she emailed me as a response, and I couldn't believe it. The way she started out was, I don't know whose mother you think I am, but I always want to be supportive of anything you do, because I know you're an unusual person and you're going to make unusual choices. And then she it felt like she was humoring me for a long time, making sure that I was in therapy and this wasn't just because my marriage didn't work out and all that. And then by the time I decided I was going to really join a convent, my friend Warren, who was still my friend to this day, he was living in Palm Springs at the time. We drove across the country to drop some stuff off at my mom's before I went up to New Jersey to join the convent. So there in my mother's house in Florida, I was getting all my stuff sorted out to go and join the convent. My mother hugged me and she said, I'm so proud of you for following your heart. And I never thought I would get that kind of acceptance from her. She's very much a boomer. She's entrenched in get married and have kids. And she had so many misgivings about it. And she said, I want to go with you. I'm going to drop you off at the convent. I'm your mother. I was 46 years old. And my mother's like this big. And so she drove up there with me to New Jersey, and she flew back, but she met the sisters. She saw how beautiful the place is and how normal the sisters are. I mean, we're all eccentric, but they're very loving and they're very welcoming. And she said, all right, I feel like you're going to be happy here. So that's where she is today. Yeah.
Wow. How about your sisters?
My younger sister.
Your actual sister.
Yeah, my younger sister is 8 years younger than I am, so I kind of raised her. It was that Gen X thing where 12-year-old kids are raising their baby brothers and sisters because mom's at work. So I was kind of like a mother figure to her, and she really understood it better than anybody in my life. She said, I totally figured you would end up doing something like that. She's very spiritual too. My older sister is a scientist, and she also is autistic. So she doesn't believe in God. She thinks that's all very, very silly because she's a scientist. And she kept trying to talk me out of it. She was like, it's going to be awful. You're going to have to scrubbing floors. And I thought, well, I did that as a nanny. So, and I would tell her, I don't care what what hardships it has. This is where I'm supposed to be. She's grudgingly accepted it over the years, and she's always asking me questions like, don't you think you could just leave and be a priest? Because then you could get married. I keep saying to her, she's been married twice, and I say, you know, not everybody's called to marriage and children. Some people are, and it's beautiful. It's a wonderful, very high calling, but not everybody. And her kids are now in their 20s, and they don't date. They've never had relationships, and she's had to learn how to accept that because she was a person who, her whole life, she never went 5 minutes without a boyfriend. She's always had a guy in her life. And her kids are like me. They're not called to that, at least not right now. So she's having to understand it through her kids. It's like God gave her these children to say, that's not everybody's calling. My baby sister, who's 20 years younger than I am, yeah, that was my father's 5th or 6th marriage, I can't remember. And she's always been very understanding about it. She went to Catholic school. She was a cradle Catholic. She was baptized in the church. We sent her to a high school that was run by, I think it was Dominican brothers in Alabama. And she loved the brothers and understood a lot more than anybody else in my family about monastic life. So it's another God thing. My little Catholic sister. Oh.
What is the name of the convent, and what do you do all day? Like, what's that dichotomy between what you thought was the Hollywood and what you
Yeah.
was real and what you
Yeah.
actually do as a sister?
The number one question we get is, what do you do all day? Because our community is the community of St. John Baptist in Mendham, New Jersey. We're an Augustinian order. We were started in 1852 in the Church of England. Our sisters in England were always known as the Clare sisters. And now that they're down to only 2 sisters, and they, as they were dying off as an order, they had a huge amount of money because the people who started our order were aristocratic women who had these huge inheritances. So they put it towards buildings and hospitals and schools. And they were in India and Wales, and then they started a chapter in the United States, which is now the main community. But they had all this money, and they set up a foundation to fight human trafficking in England. And it's called the Clare Initiative. And they're actually pretty famous in England. Like if they walk around, people say, oh, you're a Clare sister. So they've done really good works over there. And our community came out of this tradition of, they started out helping women who were impoverished in Victorian England because of the Industrial Revolution and wars. There were a lot more women in England at that time than there were males. The Church of England at that time did not have orders of nuns and monks. They had been abolished 300 years before, and they had all this poverty in England. And in European countries where they had nuns and monks, they had this vast free labor force to help with charitable causes. And England didn't have the money to pay people to do these charitable works. So the Church of England very cautiously accepted the idea of restarting religious life in England. And our community was like the second or the third one that was very cautiously restarted. So we've always been a small order to try to stay under the radar and not make any trouble. We've never had these great numbers of thousands in the Anglican communion. The communities are usually between 12 and 30 brothers or sisters. Our sisters started out in Windsor in a very impoverished neighborhood called Clure, and they took in women who were prostitutes. Because these women, because there were much more women in England than men, these women did not have a source of income because they were supposedly completely dependent on males for their income. The only thing they could do to keep from starving was to be a prostitute. So our sisters took them in, and they did something that was extremely revolutionary. They taught them to read and write. They gave them education and job skills, which was just unheard of. Usually they would be thrown into prison or the workhouse. And the Anglican penitentiary movement started empowering poor people by giving them job training. So that continued in the United States. The order in the United States was started in 1874, and it started as helping what they call fallen women and wayward girls. That was the original work. And then they got into the big institutional works that were so popular during the Industrial Revolution. It became a factory of sisters running hospitals, running schools, running orphanages. We founded a church in New York City. And then, of course, in the 40s and 50s, the government started taking on that kind of work. Orphanages were not around anymore, so our sisters shifted our work to retreats and spiritual direction. We do work with the poor still. We volunteer for other works, like Family Promise of New Jersey is a place where families can come for housing when they're unhoused. We also have a knitting ministry that we do there's a van that goes around Morris County where we live that takes medical services and things, items and food to homeless addicts. And so we knit gloves and scarves and hats and blankets for that ministry. We also run a retreat house that has 27 bedrooms in it, and it's full every weekend, just about for the next 2 years. It's booked. We welcome people from all faiths, all walks of life. We have a group of poets that comes there and has a poetry intensive weekend for twice a year. They wear very interesting clothes and they're very eccentric, but we love them. And there's a group of female rabbis that comes there for training, and there's a group that teaches philosophy to school children. They come there and stay in the summertime. So we meet lots of people. Our guest ministry welcomes about 2,000 people every year onto our campus, and we call it friend raising as opposed to fundraising, because a lot of people who've become associates and oblates and really help out the community came through our retreat ministry. Most of us are trained spiritual directors. I trained at the same place as Tammy. I'm an interfaith spiritual counselor. Our other sisters trained at General Seminary in New York City with Margaret Gunther, who was a big spiritual direction teacher. So we usually have 8 or 9 spiritual direction clients apiece with the sisters. We also do rosary bead workshops where we go into parishes and show people how to make a rosary. And we do a lot of speaking engagements and running retreats. I preach. I go around to churches and preach. We also helped found an orphanage in Africa, in Cameroon, and we are the major fundraiser for that orphanage. They have usually about 100, 125 children there at a time. So those are the big corporate works that we do. Each of us is also encouraged to have our own individual ministry so that we can go where we're called as sisters, just on our own. One of our sisters, for 25 years, has been leading tours through the UK and Ireland to holy places in those countries, which is, I want to go. I haven't been able to go yet, but she goes 3 times a year. She's 78 years old, still going strong. We never retire. We always say, I'm just going to drop dead on the altar. I'm not going to retire, because it keeps us engaged. It helps us live longer and more fulfilling lives. So that was a really long answer to your question. You're welcome. Yeah.
I was going to ask, because you mentioned a couple of times that innately you're introverted.
Yeah.
But here you are. People that you don't know, and I'm
Yeah.
sure you travel and do all this. So what
I
do
do.
you, what do you attribute to
That
that,
too.
being an introvert but being able to do this type of work very,
Yeah, I was just talking about that with Tammy. And Tammy's the only person I've met in my entire life who's like I am. She's an introvert, but she doesn't have any fear of public speaking. Ever since I was a little kid, I entered contests for public speaking, and I was in plays. That's why I was interested in theater. I never had any stage fright. But if you put me at a cocktail party, I don't know what to do with myself. I'm completely shy, and it takes a lot to get, to drag me out of my shell. I've gotten a little better about it because I worked on it in therapy. And also, yeah, exactly. The whole social thing. And also just changing the venue, going from Hollywood advertising movie people that I didn't fit in with. I was really shy with those people because those were not my people. And doing church work is much easier for me to socialize with church people. Church people are nice.
Did you get along with your ex-husband's family? Were they supportive of the marriage, or how was that?
He had, his dad had been married about 5 or 6 times at that point. And his dad was a Hollywood screenwriter. He wrote the TV film. It was about the nuclear holocaust that came day after. He wrote that. So his dad was like a slick Hollywood guy, And he always liked me. We had a great relationship, and I liked his fifth wife. She was really nice. Yeah, exactly. He never got it right. He had a sixth and a seventh wife after that. But, but I loved that side of the family. They were New Englanders. They lived in New Hampshire, and he was always very kind and warm with me. He was very sad when we divorced because I was his daughter. You know, he loved me. And the other side of Chris's family, I call him Brad in the book, but his real name is Chris. That stays here. Don't tell anybody. But his great uncles were George and Ira Gershwin, and his grandmother was Frankie Gershwin, who was their older sister. She was also a Broadway star, a dancer, a singer, and everything. She was really sweet, and I loved her. She lived in New York City on the Upper East Side, and I got to meet her. She was very tiny and very elderly at that point. But his mother, on the other hand, was one of those moms who was very possessive of her son. Nobody was ever going to be good enough for her baby. And there was a lot of infighting in that family, and the Gershwin family, because of the money and because, you know, they were always calling each other out and saying, he's too crazy to get an inheritance and all this. But I didn't have much interaction with that side of the family. It was always very tense. So his mother was like jumping for joy when we got divorced. She was like, oh, finally. And she and I didn't really communicate much because she always said I was a gold digger and I was just, you know, after him for his money and whatever. But she, to her dying day, she was saying that I ruined his life. So, yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, scapegoat. Yep.
I think it was earlier this week, on one of your TikToks, you mentioned that you were in a CPE program or
Yes.
pastoral chaplaincy in preparation for ordination.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if we could talk about what your sense of call is now in your life and your
Yeah.
calling.
First of all, thank you for watching my TikToks. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. It was interesting because right before I really started seriously pursuing the call to be a sister, I started going on retreats up to the Sisterhood of the Holy Nativity, which was in Santa Barbara at the time. And while I was up there, I felt the call to be a priest, a sister first and then a priest. And I was thinking, do they do that in the Episcopal Church? Because they've always had priests in the men's orders, but ordination for women only came about in the Episcopal Church in 74, 76. So it was still pretty recent. This was like the early 90s. And I was really curious about, you know, this call that sort of came out of nowhere. I'd never thought about being a priest before. And it's because I felt sorry for the sisters up there. They used to have the monks from Holy Cross Monastery come and celebrate Mass for them because they were all priests. And sometimes the priest couldn't show up, or, you know, the priest was sick, or there was some wires crossed. And they would just have to sit there in silence, and they couldn't receive communion. And I thought, I want to be a priest. I want to celebrate Mass for my sisters, and I want to share communion with my sisters. And so I told my mentor at the time, who was the rector at All Saints Beverly Hills, I know this is crazy that I'm being called to a nun, but guess what? I'm also being called to be a priest. So she had me set up a discernment group at that parish, and the others were discerning the priesthood as well, and we all talked about it together. I decided I couldn't do it at that time because seminary was really set up for people who didn't have jobs. And I had a big job, which, you know, I was working 10 or 12 hours a day. I didn't have the money. There wasn't a lot of funding for seminary at that time. So after I entered the convent here, I knew they had two priests who were sisters. And I said, I really, really want to pursue the calling of the priesthood after, you know, I determine if God is calling me to be a sister in this community. And they said, no, we're not doing that anymore. And I was like, what are you talking about? You have two priests. They said, well, they worked out, but there was another one that came, and she went to seminary, and we backed her, and we gave her all this money for seminary, and then she left the minute she got ordained. So we're never doing that again. And I talk about this in the book, too. So I went through years of having grief about feeling called to the priesthood and knowing that I couldn't do it if I was going to stay in this community. And I said, well, okay, God, I'll sacrifice that. You know, my relationship with you, I've had to make a lot of sacrifices. I'm just going to have to be sad about this. And then our bishop visitor, Alan Shin, who was one of the bishops in New York City, he came out for a visit, and he had his one-on-one meeting with me. He said, so what's the deal with your call to the priesthood? I said, well, the sisters have told me I can't do that because the community has decided. He said, it's not between them and you, it's between you and God. So I'm going to tell them they need to let you do this. So he did. They would listen to the bishop. So he got the ball rolling, and I've had to, going through seminary took a long time because I'm also the superior and my job, I still have a big job. So that took a long time. It was all during the depths of the pandemic, and I just finished CPE, which I thought was, and poor Tammy has to do it. I thought it was going to kill me. And I tried to tell them, I'm too old to do overnight shifts, and they said, no, you're not. We've got an 82-year-old woman who does overnight shifts, so it's no excuse. So it's been a lot of education, a lot of time and everything, but I still feel called. And whenever I was told before that I couldn't do it, I resolved it by saying, I'll always feel called, whether I get to do it or not. There's always going to be that call. So it's been a lot of hard work. And I tell people, being a sister and trying for the priesthood it has a lot of hardships, a lot of heartbreak, obstacles, and all that. But if you're where you're supposed to be, it's worth it. Just like when somebody joins the army and you say, how can you go through all that boot camp and combat and all that? If you're called to be a soldier, if that's where you're meant to be, and a policeman, people like that, the hardships are worth it. So I've been able to endure it with a lot of prayers.
So do you hope to then become a priest at your community?
Yeah.
Or in a larger church?
Yeah, that's a good question that a lot of people ask. They think that I would be assigned to a parish, but I would be non-parochial clergy is what they call it. I would just serve my sisters and do supply work as a priest when parishes needed me. But mostly I'll be at the convent. Yeah.
How many are in your order right now?
Right now, we have 10 living in the house, and we have 2 in nursing homes. We just received a novice back in April, like the end of April. We had 2 postulants. One of them chickened out. She couldn't do it. But the other one stayed with us, and I think she's going to make it. So our usual quorum in our community is 12. It's been 12 for a really long time. Yeah. Yep.
Even though you say that it's been hard, you seem to have achieved all the callings that you felt.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you get your patience?
I actually don't have any patience at all. I'm
Okay, your persistence.
I know. I've always been like that. I want things to happen quickly. Like even when I joined the order, I thought I was just going to show up with a suitcase and a guitar and I'd be a sister. And even when I first decided, I thought, I'm just going to tell them I want to join. They're going to let me do it. But they said you have to get out of debt. So I had to wait 10 years. I felt like Jacob, working 7 years for Rebecca and 7 more years. And I kept saying, God, I know you have a reason for this, but is there any wiggle room in this? It was just taking forever, and I wasn't getting any younger, and I hated my job in Los Angeles. And then when I got to the convent, they said, no, you're not going to be life professed or have perpetual vows for 6 or 8 years. And I was like, what? Nobody told me this. And of course, now I see the wisdom of it, now that I am life professed, and I can see other people who have been exploring vocations. It does take that long. It really does, to make that commitment. And now I look at it as, okay, I was an adjunct professor before, and now I've got tenure. So I worked all these years to get tenure, and unless you murder somebody, you're not going to get kicked out after your life professed. You're in it for life, and it's a binding contract through the diocese and everything that we, even if you leave, there has to be like a divorce settlement. You have to be taken care of. So just keeping the goal in front of me at all times. Doing a lot of angry praying with God, driving around going, God, forget it, I'm quitting, and then something would happen that would be that one little next step on the journey. The journey to the priesthood, I've been just fuming the whole time because I thought, why do I have all this training? I've been in ministry for 25 years. Like, why do I have to do this? And they'll say, everybody has to do this, calm down, So now I can see the wisdom of that. I feel very well prepared, but it's not easy.
What is the relationship with the Catholic Church, and also how do the people in your order feel about the new pope?
Good question. our relationship with the Catholics, of course, back in the 16th century was pretty terrible because the English Church broke away from the Pope, and it wasn't just Henry VIII that did it. It was a lot of kings in Europe were doing it as well because the Pope had too much power over monarchs, and the Church had too much money in England. In England, the Church owned 1/5 of the land in England, and they did not answer to the king like all the monasteries and convents. They didn't answer to the king, they answered to the Pope. So like 1/4 of all the people in the country answered not to the king. So, and that's how it was in other countries. So there was an acrimonious breakup. There was a horrible, bloody English Reformation. Bloody Mary, the Queen, when she came into power, she turned back all those, the break with Rome and everything. So it has been contentious for centuries. It's still happening in Georgia. And I came into it at a time when relations between the Anglican Communion and Rome were getting warmer. It took that long. I mean, there were little ecumenical efforts made ever since, I guess, like the late 1800s, but really just being warm and going to each other's places of worship and things like that is the norm now. And we have 2 convents very near us. We're big buddies with all the Roman Catholic sisters. A lot of them have the same political beliefs that we do, and they just are under the radar, you know, they don't tell the bishop or anything. And one of my best friends is a Roman Catholic sister, and every time, they have a huge convent because they're Roman Catholic, you know, they got a lot of money, and they have like 125 sisters, which they think is really small. And every time they have a barbecue for Memorial Day, July 1st, Labor Day, they always invite us. We go over and hang out with them. And my friend, Sister Joanne, started a book club where we read books about the religious life. And so I go over there and hang out with the Roman Catholics. And we have a lot of the same issues. I mean, a lot of the same hopes and dreams, and a lot of the same problems that we're trying to work out. Like, there's a huge population of aging sisters now, and we have to work out health care and benefits and all that. So we've been a real support for each other, especially during the pandemic, because we were in our little bubble in the convent, and they were in their little bubble, and we could visit each other's bubbles, but we couldn't go anywhere else. So they really saved us through the pandemic. Oh, and we like the new Pope.
You like the new Pope?
Yeah, he's very centrist. He's not right or left.
Right.
He's with us on some things and not on others, but we say, well, you know, it's going to take 500 years. So, yeah. Does somebody has it? Yeah.
Is your order supported by the diocese, or are you self-supporting?
That is wonderful for you to ask that, because a lot of people have this misconception that, like the Roman Catholic Church, that our diocese and the wider church supports us financially. They do not. We are specifically independent because in the 1850s, when we were started, our mother foundress and the other ones that were just starting up said, the church is not going to have its hands on our property or our money. We're going to keep it, even though they had to have a man manage it with them, who was then called a warden, which is really weird, but they always had their own finances. So our financing comes from individual donations, and the majority of our funds in the past and right now are from people who have died and left us money in their estate. That's our largest source of income. We also used to get a lot of grants for our building upkeep and repairs, but then in the state of New Jersey, they stopped giving grants to religious organizations in 2018. They recently started it back up, so we're going to try to do that, because 80% of our buildings and grounds budget was from grants. So. Mm-hmm.
So our teacher, Therese Bimka, is online.
Fabulous.
Say hi
Oh.
right there. And she's asking the question, what has been the most meaningful spiritual growth that emerged from this commitment?
First of all, I love Therese Bimka. She's a saint. I love her to pieces. Wonderful teacher. The biggest revelation for me was that, of course, my spiritual life has deepened tremendously, and my prayer life, we pray a lot. We're in chapel 6 times a day praying. We have 2.5 hours of private prayer time every day. That has really strengthened my connection with God, my trust, guidance from God. That's the big thing that you get when you deepen that relationship. But the most surprising thing was that God healed a lot of my my scars from childhood about being in relationship with other people. I had never really stood up for myself. I had never argued with people. I was raised as a Southern woman. You just don't do that. But in my community, I learned that if I argue with my sisters, if we have a falling out, if they're not going to abandon me, they're not going to reject me, they're still going to love me. And we have a thing in our rule that says, if you have a dispute with a sister, you have to apologize to each other. And then we have an informal thing where you have to hug and say you love each other. That never happened to me before. And so I learned how to love people in a much more authentic, really deeply, emotionally intimate way that had never happened. We can yell at each other. It's sort of like when you've been married for 75 years and you look at your spouse and you say, stop doing that, that's annoying. But you know that you're not going to divorce that person over that. You just have this layer of superficiality is taken away. We speak very directly to each other. And we do say, stop that, it's annoying. A lot.
I have another question. This is a Tammy question.
Tammy question.
Get ready.
Yeah. Brace for impact.
My question is about your clothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a minister, and people don't know that when I'm walking on the street.
Yeah.
But they must know that you're a nun because
Absolutely.
of what you wear, right?
Yeah.
What's that like for you?
It was interesting because a big part of my interest in the community where I belong now is that they wear the habit all the time. We have Mondays off. Monday is our Sabbath day where we don't have to wear the habit if we don't want to. So most of the sisters dress in regular clothes. I don't, because the minute I got a habit, I was like, thank you, God. Because I was a very odd woman. I hate shopping. I don't know anything about fashion. When I worked in advertising, long before Steve Jobs did this, I wore pretty much the same thing every day. I had like 15 pairs of black pants, 15 cardigans, and I would just switch up the t-shirt, like I would wear a graphic t-shirt underneath, because I don't like to make choices about what I wear. I had decision fatigue because my job was so stressful and so hard. I just wore the same thing every day. I would have done great in Catholic school wearing a uniform. And growing up in the South, I had a lot of body dysmorphia about feeling fat and out of shape and thinking people were going to be scowling at how I looked. So to cover up, it feels very safe for me. And in New York City, I used to walk around in my habit. People would always assume I'm a Roman Catholic sister. And they would come up to me, ask me to pray for them. They would always tell me this long diatribe about where they went to school and sister so-and-so and blah, blah, blah. And I would say, I'm Episcopalian, but I know you got a good education. I hope nobody hit you with a ruler or anything. Because a lot of them did. And so it really opened it up for me to meet people on the streets. And still, if I go to the grocery store or something, somebody will say a prayer for me, sister. And it's really nice to see that people still believe, It's great.
So I know a lot of Roman Catholic nuns don't wear a habit anymore.
That's right.
All the Episcopal nuns still wear a habit?
Pretty much. I mean, we never had a Vatican II where we got rid of things like that. So we always say we're twice the Catholic, half the guilt, because we hung on to a lot of high church things. And our friends who are Roman Catholic nuns, of course, half of them don't wear habits, but the Mallinckrodt sisters still do. They have the cute habit with the clip-on veil and the little skirts. So they feel comfortable around us in our habits, but others have never worn a habit, like in the Roman Catholic orders. In our orders, we do have some that they only wear their habit when they're worshiping in chapel. It's sort of like a liturgical garment. We're having a conflict right now in our denomination because there are extended Christian communities, just like tertiary communities in the Roman Catholic Church, where you can have a job, you can be married, you can have kids, but you still come together for these convocations of prayer. And they started wearing habits. And to us, we were saying, you're an extended community, you're not monastic, you're not a vowed community living together 24/7, so we don't feel like you should be wearing habits, because to us it symbolizes a commitment of rejecting the world and materialism and all that. And then over the years, they started getting more and more elaborate with their habits. But they were doing things like, if you're a tertiary, they're all really nice people. We didn't want to get mad at them or anything, but somebody was saying, I saw this lady in my church and she was wearing a Franciscan habit and she was pregnant and she kissed a man. So that's why we have a problem with it, because it sends out a very confusing message. And people already don't even know that they're Episcopal monks and nuns. And when they see somebody in a habit doing something like that, we have a branding issue. You know, like, how are we doing on time? Am I okay?
It is 10 after 7 right now.
Okay, good. Doing great on time. Anybody want to ask something weird?
You get vacation and you like go
Yes.
to Europe and take off in your
Yes.
a little better.
That is one of the perks of religious life, because we do work 6 days a week. We only have 1 day off. We are on the clock from 6 a.m. to about 9 p.m. at night. We are working or praying, either one. And so we get a month's vacation every year. And you can take it any way you want. It used to be you could only visit your family, but now that most of the families have passed on, you can visit your friends. I went out to visit friends in Los Angeles last September, and we really encourage, our order in particular, from the beginning, has always encouraged contact with the family, because our mother foundress was Irish. She came from a big family, and she didn't want to be in one of those orders where you can only write 1 letter a year to your family and you don't see them. So we're very blessed with that. Some orders are much more strict. You know, if they're an enclosed order, you don't have much contact with people, but I couldn't do that. I have a lot of friends.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
So what's the weirdest question that you feel comfortable answering that you've been asked?
I think questions about money. People are.
You have your own money.
That's a good question. People are very shy about asking. You know, the sisters have money. We're not allowed to have bank accounts, like individual bank accounts. We do have a credit card, like a company credit card, that we can use. We have a strict rules about what you can use it for. If you want to buy shoes that match your habit, they have to match your habit. You can't buy a pair of pink high heels or anything. You have to wear uniform items. And we used to not buy our own toothpaste, shampoo, soap. There used to be just a supply of it that was kept for us. But we've loosened that up now that we have credit cards. And everybody has their different dermatological needs and everything. So we're allowed to buy that on our credit card. Each of us gets $50 in cash a month to spend however we want it. And you know how far that goes these days. But if you want to have lunch with a friend, or you want, for me, I always try to go and get good coffee someplace. And we had talked about increasing that amount, but we said, no, you know, we're under a vow of poverty, which means we only buy what we absolutely need. We never just buy something on a whim, or let's go out for sushi and spend like $300. But the other thing is, because we're sisters, just about everywhere we go, people want to treat us. Like if you go out to lunch with your friend, you get a little $50, and they'll say, no, let me get this. So that's another perk. Not gonna lie. That one really is great. Yeah, yes, unintentional perk. There have been times because I like to eat by myself. You know, I was always pretty much a solitary person because I didn't date. So I just got used to going out to eat by myself, going to museums by myself, and all that. And when I first got the habit, I would go to pay, and the waitress would say, one of the other patrons got it for you. Wow, that's so nice. Yep.
You said you took the vow of poverty, or
Mm-hmm.
now, if you worked obviously for the first 46 years of your life,
Yeah.
the money that you collected through 401ks, you get
Yeah.
to keep all that, and then you have Social Security for like
Yes.
when you get older.
Mm-hmm. We do have, the sisters do receive Social Security. Some of them have been in community for 50 or 60 years, and they only worked 1 year, so they don't. But others have had jobs when they were working in the community, and they received a salary, so they get Social Security. That goes into our main fund, our general fund. It helps with paying bills and keeping us up and everything, feeding us. And as far as 401ks and inheritance, any kind of money you have, when you're life professed, you have to either turn all that over to the community or give it to a family member. You can't have it yourself. That's our hard thing to do, because you think, yeah, I worked all my life for this. But then the community, it's part of our constitution that we have to take care of the sisters until the day they die. So you think, well, I'm going to be taken care of, at least. I'll be fed at my old age. So it's a good retirement situation, to tell you the truth. After you reach a certain age, the sisters determine if you're not able to, quote unquote, look out for yourself. Look after yourself. That's what the phrase is. Then we talk about sending somebody into care. We try to keep people at home as long as we possibly can. We have 2 sisters who have dementia, so we kept them at home as long as we could. But it was very unsafe to have them in the house. One of them kept trying to drive, long past when she should have been driving. And we had to hide the keys from her, and that became a big problem. But we just thought she's going to have a head-on collision. And eventually she had a medical incident that occurred. She had to go in the emergency room and be hospitalized. And her doctors said, "Are you aware that she has Alzheimer's?" We said, "Yeah, we know." And he said, "I cannot believe she is still living at home in the state that she's in, because how on earth are you taking care of her?" We're like, "I don't know, we just do." And so she went from there to a nursing home where she could be safer. And she's very mischievous. They put a little ankle thing on her so she wouldn't escape. She was always trying to escape. And exactly, I know. And she would borrow scissors from fellow residents and cut the thing off her ankle and try to escape. So we got to watch that one. Yeah.
Sister Monica, there's another question online.
Okay.
Lisa, it is, do the bishops take a vow of poverty too, and why or why not?
They do not. They are first among equals. It's a job. They get a salary. They get a place to live. And they can accumulate wealth and all that. The bishops can be married and have kids. So they really are just like salaried professionals. I don't know how much they make, but it's not as much as you think. That's what they always say.
Are you a silent community?
Silent?
Yeah, you take a vow of silence?
No, we are not, and that is a really good thing for the public to know. There are 2 types of community. There's contemplative and active. Contemplative is where you are silent most of the time. You don't interact with the outside world. All your ministry is in-house, like they sell bread and cheese and cookies and stuff. And they're very, very prayerful. They work really hard, menial jobs. Thomas Merton was one of those. He was a, what was he, Carmelite? I think, no. He's like one of my favorite people. I can't remember which order he was in, but he was in Gethsemane in Kentucky. And they were cloistered like that. Our community, like most Episcopal communities, is both active and contemplative, which is a really hard thing to do. A lot of the Roman communities, some of them are still contemplative and they're still silent most of the time, but the other Roman communities that I've been around are very active. They say prayers in the morning, they go off and work at a job. They're like a hospital administrator or school principal or something. They come back and they pray together in the evening, and their life is, a lot of it is outside the convent. We have both, where we have our work outside our community, but we go into the chapel every morning at 7 a.m. and pray lauds, and we have Mass after that every single day. We have another prayer service at 9:30 a.m. and a community meeting after that. Then we have noonday prayer at noon, and we pray the Angelus at noonday. And then we have a work period in the afternoon from like 2 to 4. And then we have Vespers at 4:45, which is about a 45-minute prayer service. And then we go into silence and prayer from after supper to Compline, which is our evening service. So we're pretty much, it was really hard for me to get used to that because I was such an active person. I was used to going to work, and you work all day. So it was really hard for me to get used to, you work a little bit and then you go pray, and you work a little bit and you go pray. But there's a lot of wisdom in that way of living, because you don't get too focused on your work. We call it the daily office when we go into the chapel to pray, because that is our number one primary work, is to chant the Psalms, to pray for the world, to sing the hymns. That takes priority over everything else. If you're in the middle of a conversation and the bell rings for chapel, you go to chapel. If you're working and trying to do something and the bell rings, you drop it and you go to chapel. At first I hated it because I was like, how does anybody get anything done? That's not enough time. But somehow when you're living that life, it's a mystical thing. Time expands in a very strange, unexplainable way. Time expands, and you have the time to, I went to seminary, Yeah, I went to seminary and wrote a book while living the life of a sister. And I don't know how God did that, but it worked out. So, yeah.
I know you have a long drive home.
Yeah.
Is one or two more questions?
Fine. Yep.
If you know,
Mm-hmm.
at what age do you think you had an inclination that you wanted to go into religious service?
It was when I was a little kid. I was 7 or 8 years old, and luckily at the time, I was watching The Flying Nun. It was in syndication when I was a child. I was a good recruiter, that show, really. And they were playing movies on the Saturday afternoon matinee on TV. And I was Gen X. Nobody cared how much television I watched, so I watched these movies, and they were playing movies from the 50s and 60s when religious life was really big. And it bled over into public consciousness with things like The Flying Nun, The Nun Story. There was a movie called A Change of Habit, which is the same title as my book, with Mary Tyler Moore and Elvis Presley. They did, I think, A Mule for Sister Sarah, where there was a nun in that, and Lilies of the Field. All these movies from that time period, because a lot of the social justice work of the 60s was dovetailing with the religious life. There was a lot of, oh, you do that too. Well, we do that too. And it became popular in mainstream media, for good or for worse, because a lot of it, made a lot of misconceptions happen. But I was a little child, and I was fascinated by it, and I wanted to read every book I could get my hands on about nuns. There weren't that many. And as I got older, I would go to the library in Beverly Hills when I was working in advertising, and I would check out books on nuns and just think, wow, I wish I could do this. I guess I can't, but So that was the weirdest thing about the call. I would say there were 3 aspects of my call. The first one was it was out of left field. It was over a lifetime. The second quality was it was a lifetime feeling. And the third thing was it was persistent. I couldn't cure it in therapy. I couldn't cure it by doing other things and finding another path. And it turns out I was being called, but I had to do all that other stuff too. When I was married, we went to a marriage counselor, and that led to therapy, which led to me becoming a nun. So every stepping stone was there for a reason. For sure, yeah.
How about the ages of the,
Good
women?
question.
It must
Yeah.
be a little concerning if
It
you're
is.
not getting younger people.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the communities, this is something we talk about all the time, is that, the United States has sort of the same issue. There's this huge generation that is aging, and so it's putting all this pressure on the healthcare system and the memory cares and nursing homes. And in religious communities, there was this huge influx of sisters after World War II. Usually there's a huge surge in religious life after a war, unfortunately. And so they had all these thousands and thousands of sisters in Roman Catholic communities that entered in the 50s and 60s. And then it died down, which people act like this is something new, but it's something that's happened ever since the 6th century. They'll rise in population, they'll almost go away, and they rise again, just based on the growth of a certain generation. And that's what we're seeing in our denomination and in the Roman Catholic Church. But we're also seeing the benefits of that, because Joan Chittister wrote a book, I think in the 90s, called Fire in These Ashes. And it's all about that particular issue of people thinking that the church is dying because most of the people are older, religious orders are dying because most of the people have gray hair. And our take on it, and Joan Chittister's take on it, is it has to contract at some point. The church has to contract into a smaller form and be rebuilt better, because if we're seeing a decline in people coming to churches, it means the church is not doing its job. We're not telling people how a walk with God will benefit their lives and showing them that with our lives. And it's the same in religious communities. We're not going to attract people if we don't live the life and really be a Christian witness for the world. So that's why I started doing what I do, is to educate the public about, hey, this is great. Everybody needs to do it. And we did, we have a millennial novice now who, that generation was brought up having to do volunteer hours to get credit in school. So they're very service-minded, they're very globally minded, environmental. All the causes that we support, they really are interested in. And so we have young ladies coming to visit us quite a bit, and they're still too scared to join, but all of our inquirers are in their 20s and early 30s, which is very hopeful. Yeah. I think it's that you have to find out who you really are. I always tell people those personality tests seem so annoying, but you should take the Myers-Briggs personality test, find out your Enneagram, whatever you think would sort of solidify your identity. And there was a book called What Color is Your Parachute? I got this exercise from them. They said, write a list of your values. Are you living your life according to that value system? And if you're not, and like I found out I was an introvert who was working in advertising with a bunch of extroverts, an open plan. I also have sensory issues, which means the bright lights and the noise was, no wonder I was miserable. I wasn't going with my real personality type. I was trying to be another personality type. So I advise people, and it's never too late. You can always, I was 46, and I've seen people enter, like our cutoff age is 50, but I've seen women enter religious life older than that because they have a different way of being and they can assimilate easier. But find out who you really are, and then find your tribe. Find people who are like you that support you and encourage you, because if you have fractious relationships and you hate your job and all that, it could just be that you're in the wrong ball game. So.
Would you close us in a prayer?
Yes. Okay. Let us pray. Our gracious and loving God, we thank you so much for this gathering tonight to discuss you and your wisdom and your guidance in our lives. We thank you for bringing people together to discuss how to heal the world, how to make a difference. And I ask that everyone here receives a blessing from you and guidance from you about how to grow closer to you in your love. We ask these things in your name. Amen. Thank you, everybody. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So just a reminder, if you'd like to purchase Sister Monica's book, we have them in stock. We're going to sell them tonight for $20, which is a discounted rate, and all of the money raised will go to the Seymour Oxford